and some other questions about how energy is stored and transferred throughout the cells. So our first question is, describe flow of energy between glucose to ATP during respiration. So with respiration, we have two forms. We have anaerobic and aerobic. Anaerobic is the one that needs oxygen, and aerobic is the one that needs oxygen, and anaerobic is no oxygen, without oxygen. So in our aerobic respiration, oxygen is going to be the last acceptor. Just remember that. And then in our anaerobic, there are other molecules that will be the acceptors at the end. So how energy is transferred, we start with a glucose molecule, and it is then catabolized or broken down into smaller pieces. Those carbon and hydrogen bonds are broken down, and that releases energy. This energy is used to create ATP, and we have to transfer the energy to ATP. Once we transfer the energy to ATP, it produces carbon dioxide, which needs to also be broken down. This happens during the glycolysis. It's kind of like a little overview, but glycolysis is the main system that the respiration is going to use. So in glycolysis, we need to break down sugar and get it into more energy. So while undergoing glycolysis, glucose is catabolized, which releases the ATP. The ATP needs, or the electron needs NADH or NAD and FAD to take that extra electron that was just released from the energy, the catabolism of the breaking the bonds. It needs something to transfer it. So the electron gets onto the NAD and the FAD, making NADH and FADH, and those are now carriers of that electron. And then once this creates that CO2, it's going to also release enzyme acetyl-CoA. And this causes for the Krebs cycle to start and be in reaction. During the Krebs cycle, we are creating more carbon dioxide, more ATP. Those NADH are also cycling it, and FADH2 are also cycling it. And you usually have to do about 2 rounds to break down the glucose in the Krebs cycle. The last molecule or electron to be passed is going to be accepted by oxygen, because this is aerobic respiration. And then our next question is, compare to the flow of energy from glucose to lactic to fermentation. So in fermentation, it starts very similar to respiration, but they don't use a Krebs cycle, and it's kind of straight to the point. Fermentation starts with the breakdown of glucose, breaks down those bonds again. We have the NAD and the FADH. NADH, FADH2 carries those electrons, and then that is going to use energy and break down into 2 pyruvates. So the pyruvates are going to be the final acceptor in fermentation, which is then going to be used and broken down into alcohols, lactic acid, alcohols like for medicines and cleaning and such. In comparison to respiration, respiration's has a lot more going on, and it has the electron transport change and the Krebs cycle. And then what else does it have? The fermentation is very low in energy. So fermentation only produces very few ATP, and respiration is very efficient. Our next question is, how is energy stored in glucose? And the energy is stored in glucose between those CH bonds, and once you catabolize those, it releases energy. So that's where it's held. What is the carrier for glucose to ATP? That's going to be that NADH and FADH2. They are the main carriers. And then our last question is, compare ATP production with fermentation and respiration. So in aerobic respiration, it produces 38 ATP, and in anaerobic, it produces 2 to 36. So anaerobic is kind of give or take, but it's still usually better than fermentation, which is only 2 consistently, ATPs, 2 ATPs. So respiration is definitely more efficient in making that type of energy. And that is all. Thank you.